Bastien Moreau hadn't moved from his wheelchair in 4 years. But when he saw the little girl cross his lawn that October morning, every muscle in his paralyzed body screamed to run. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. Yellow sweater, curls, catching the wind, walking with the clumsy confidence of a child who believes the whole world is safe. Bastien's hands locked on the armrests. No. His breath caught somewhere between his chest and his throat. The physiotherapist was saying something behind him, insurance forms, next week's schedule, but her voice dissolved into static, because he knew that walk. Have you ever looked at someone and just known? Before your mind could catch up with your heart, before logic could talk you out of what your soul recognized instantly. The little girl stopped near the fountain, tilted her head, stared at the stone angels like she was memorizing them. Bastien's brother Julien appeared from the main house, jogging across the grass. He scooped her up, laughing, spinning her once before setting her on his hip. The child squealed, a sound so bright it cut through the window glass, through 4 years of silence, through everything Bastien had taught himself to stop feeling. Julien never mentioned having a daughter, not once, not in 4 years of living on the estate, 4 years of managing Bastien's care, his finances, his entire existence, 4 years of brotherly devotion that everyone praised as heroic. Your brother gave up everything for you, the nurses always said. Bastien watched Julien carry the girl toward the rose garden, watched him point at something in the hedges, watched her laugh again. The timeline was already building itself in Bastien's head. He'd been an architect before the accident. His brain still worked in measurements, in structures, in dates that had to align. 3 years old, which meant she was born approximately 9 months after Nia vanished. Nia Rowe, the woman Bastien had loved. The woman who disappeared without a word, without a note, without a single explanation 3 days after he gave her everything he had. His trust, his secrets, and evidence that could destroy his family. The woman everyone assumed had simply decided she couldn't handle the complications of loving a man in a wheelchair. The woman who left behind a flash drive, hidden in the lining of her jewelry box, with a single file labeled, "When the time is right." A flash drive Bastien never opened, because looking at it meant accepting she was really gone. But Nia didn't just vanish. She left something behind, and it was standing on his lawn in a yellow sweater. The little girl shifted in Julien's arms, her gaze drifting toward the house, toward Bastien's window. For one suspended moment, their eyes met across 30 yards of manicured grass, and Bastien saw his own eyes staring back at him. Welcome back to Love Stories with Mr. Tyrell. If you're returning, thank you for being here. If this is your first time finding us, I'm genuinely glad you clicked. You're about to hear a story that will challenge everything you think you know about loyalty, family, and the lengths people will go to protect their secrets. What you just witnessed, Bastien at that window, frozen in disbelief, that's only the beginning. Before this is over, you'll discover what was on that flash drive, why Nia really disappeared, and how a paralyzed man trapped in his own home managed to expose a betrayal so calculated it had been years in the making. But before we continue, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. Tap the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this hook grabbed you the way I think it did, go ahead and leave a like. It helps more people find these stories that matter. This channel exists for one reason: to bring you true stories that move you, teach you, and remind you that reality is often stranger and more powerful than anything fiction could create. Stories about real people facing impossible choices. All right, let's go back to that window. Let's go back to Bastien. whose world just shattered with a single glance. Because what happened next would set off a chain of events that no one, not Julian, not the family lawyer, not even the police, saw coming. And it all started with a man who couldn't walk, but refused to stop moving forward. Bastien Moreau wasn't born into wealth. He built it brick by brick, contract by contract, from a drafting table in a basement apartment to an architectural firm that redesigned skylines across 3 continents. By 35, his name was on buildings in Paris, Singapore, and New York. By 40, he was worth more money than he could spend in 5 lifetimes. He was the kind of man people noticed when he entered a room. 6'2", broad-shouldered, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. He didn't raise his voice, because he never had to. He didn't chase recognition, because recognition always found him. Bastien Moreau commanded empires, until the day he couldn't command his own legs. It happened on a Tuesday, a site inspection in Lyon. Routine. Bastien had done 1,000 of them, but the scaffolding on the 7th floor hadn't been secured properly. One step, one miscalculation by a contractor trying to save time on a deadline that didn't matter anymore. And Bastien fell. 3 seconds of free fall. Then impact. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive. Spinal cord injury. T6. Complete. Medical terminology that translated into one devastating reality. Everything below his chest was gone. No movement, no sensation, no realistic hope of recovery. They rebuilt his bones. They couldn't rebuild his life. The estate became a prison dressed as a sanctuary. 23 rooms, 12 acres of manicured gardens, a full-time staff of 8, nurses, physiotherapists, housekeepers, a private chef, everything designed for his comfort, everything a constant reminder of what he'd lost. Bastien moved through his days in carefully managed intervals. Morning exercises that led nowhere. Afternoon calls with business managers, who now made decisions he used to make instinctively. Evening meals eaten alone in a dining room built for 20, surrounded by art he'd collected in another life. The silence was the worst part. Not the physical kind. There were always people around. Always voices in hallways, always the low hum of medical equipment, but the emotional silence, the hollow space where real conversation used to live. Everyone spoke at him now, never to him. They asked how he was feeling without waiting for an answer. They smiled too much, touched his shoulder with that particular tenderness reserved for broken things, chose their words carefully. Like he was fragile, like honesty might shatter what little remained. And then there was his family. Julian showed up 3 days after the accident. Bastien's younger brother, the one who'd bounced between failed business ventures and borrowed money for 15 years. The one Bastien had quietly rescued more times than either of them acknowledged out loud. "I'm here for you," Julian said, settling into the guest house without being invited. Family takes care of family. Their cousin Maurice arrived shortly after. Then Aunt Colette, draped in expensive concern. Then a handful of distant relatives Bastien hadn't seen since their grandfather's funeral decades ago. All of them worried. All of them helpful. All of them suddenly intensely interested in how the estate was being managed, who held power of attorney, and what the contingency plans looked like if Bastien's condition deteriorated further. His lawyer, Richard Voss, was the only one who named it plainly. They smell blood in the water. But Bastien was too exhausted to fight, too hollowed out to care. So he let them circle, let them perform their concern, let them play their carefully rehearsed roles while he retreated further into the architecture of his own isolation. It was into this world, cold, managed, suffocating, that Nero arrived. She wasn't supposed to be there. The estate had standing accounts with 3 pharmacies, 2 medical suppliers, and an organic grocery service that delivered twice weekly. The regular courier was a quiet man in his 60s named Claude, who never said more than 5 words and asked fewer questions. But Claude was out sick that Thursday in March, and the company sent Nia instead. She arrived in a beat-up delivery van with a broken muffler you could hear from 2 streets away, pulled up to the service entrance with the ease of someone completely unbothered by protocol, knocked on the door with the confidence of a person who had never once in her life shrunk herself to make others comfortable. The housekeeper, Margot, tried to move her along quickly. "Sign here. Leave the boxes. Go." But Nia saw Bastien through the window, saw him sitting alone in the conservatory, surrounded by architectural drawings he could design in his mind, but no longer execute with his hands. And she did something no one else had done in 8 months of carefully managed care. She walked right up to him and asked, "Are those yours?" Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "Can I get you anything?" Not the careful, measured tone everyone else used around him, like he was something that might go off without warning. Just genuine curiosity about his work, about him. Bastien looked up, really looked at her. Mid-20s, dark hair, pulled into a messy ponytail, a small scar above her left eyebrow, work boots that had clearly logged thousands of miles, and eyes, alert, warm, completely direct, that didn't drift toward his wheelchair at all. They looked at him. "Yes," Bastien said, caught off guard. "I designed that 5 years ago." Nia leaned closer, studying the blueprints with an attention that told him immediately she wasn't being polite. "The Meridian Tower in Brussels." He blinked. "You know it?" She smiled. "I grew up 4 blocks from it. Used to eat lunch on that plaza every day before I moved to France. That fountain," she pointed without hesitation, "best spot in the city on a hot afternoon." For the first time in 8 months, Bastien smiled. A real one. Not the practiced, reassuring expression he'd learned to produce for nurses and family members. A real, unguarded, caught-off-guard smile. Nia came back the following week. Claude was still out, or perhaps he wasn't. Bastien never asked, and didn't want to examine why. She stayed longer the second time. They talked about architecture, about the city she'd grown up in, about a structural flaw in her apartment building that had bothered her for years. The 3rd week, she brought coffee. The 4th week, she stayed for an hour and a half. And somewhere in those quiet conversations, between blueprints and bad coffee, and laughter that echoed through rooms that had forgotten what it sounded like, something shifted. Bastien didn't fully understand it yet, but the day Nero walked through his door, the walls he'd built around himself started to crack. He just didn't know how much it was going to cost them both. The deliveries became visits. Then the visits became conversations, and the conversations became something neither of them was brave enough to name out loud. By June, Nia wasn't coming because the pharmacy sent her. She was coming because Bastien asked. A text on Tuesday, a call on Friday. Small excuses. "Could you pick up that book I mentioned? Do you remember the name of that cafe?" That were really just invitations to stay. And she did. She stayed through summer thunderstorms and long Sunday afternoons, stayed through physical therapy sessions that left Bastien exhausted and frustrated, stayed when Julian made passive comments about the help overstepping boundaries. She stayed when everyone else had reasons to leave. Nero didn't care. I didn't care about the cars in the garage, or the art on the walls, or the fact that Bastien's watch cost more than most people earned in a year. She'd grown up working class in Brussels, put herself through university delivering packages and cleaning offices, and she carried a dignity that money couldn't buy or break. What moved her was the man behind the empire. She laughed at his dry humor, challenged his opinions on design and music and politics, brought him books. She loved and argued with him when he hated them, sat in comfortable silence when words weren't necessary. One afternoon in July, she found him staring at old photos from a build site in Morocco, back when he could still climb scaffolding and shake hands and stand in the sun without assistance. "You miss it," she said quietly. Every day. She didn't offer empty comfort, didn't say it would get better, or that he was still the same person. She just pulled a chair beside him and looked at the photos too. "Tell me about this one," she said, pointing. And he did. For 3 hours, they went through every project, every triumph, every lesson he'd learned with his hands and his spine intact. She listened, like his past mattered, like he still did. That was the day Bastien realized he was in love with her. He fought it at first, told himself it was gratitude, loneliness, the predictable psychology of a man whose world had shrunk to medical appointments and managed care. Told himself Nia was kind to everyone, that he was reading too much into her presence. But then she started appearing in his dreams, started being the first person he thought of in the morning, started making him want things he thought the accident had taken permanently. Partnership, intimacy, a future that looked like more than survival. The walls he'd built came down slowly, then all at once. By August, she had a key to the side entrance. By September, she knew his coffee order, his medication schedule, the names of every nurse and therapist. By October, she was finishing his sentences, and Julian noticed it started with small things. Invoices that didn't match, medical equipment billed twice, therapy sessions. Bastien never authorized appearing on monthly statements. His business manager, handpicked by Julian, suddenly evasive about quarterly reports. Richard Voss, his lawyer, pulled him aside in November. "Something's wrong with the estate finances. I can't access the full records anymore. Your brother changed the permissions." "On what authority?" "Yours, apparently." Signed documents from July. Bastien never signed anything in July. He started investigating quietly, asked for files, cross-referenced dates, found discrepancies that would have been invisible to anyone who wasn't an architect, trained to spot when numbers didn't align. Someone was stealing from him, and that someone had access to everything. His accounts, his medical care, his legal documents. He needed proof, hard evidence, something that couldn't be explained away, or buried under family loyalty and charm. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed someone he could trust, someone no one would suspect, someone outside the family's reach. He chose Nia, not because she was convenient, because she was the only person in his life who looked at him and saw a man, not a meal ticket. "I need your help," Bastien said one December evening. They were in his study. Rain hammered the windows. The rest of the house was quiet. Nia set down her tea. "With what?" He told her everything. The missing money, the forged signatures, the way Julian had slowly, methodically taken control of every aspect of Bastien's life, while pretending to be the devoted brother. "I have copies," Bastien said. Financial records, emails, documentation that proves what he's been doing. But I can't move them myself. Can't risk him finding out I know. Why me? Because no one would expect it. Nia was quiet for a long moment. What do you need me to do? He gave her a sealed envelope containing printed records, bank transfers, altered documents, communications between Julianne and the business manager, everything he'd been collecting for months. Take this somewhere safe, Bastien said. Not your apartment. Somewhere Julian can't trace. When the time is right, we'll take everything to Richard and the authorities. When's the right time? When I have enough to make sure he can't talk his way out of it. Nia held the envelope like it weighed 10 pounds. Maybe it did. You trust me with this? Bastien reached for her hand. She took it. I trust you with everything. She kissed him then, soft and certain, a promise that tasted like coffee and rain. I won't let you down, she whispered. 3 days later, she was gone. Looking back, there were signs. The way she held her stomach when she thought he wasn't watching. The questions she almost asked, then swallowed. The conversation about the future that felt strangely urgent. If something happened, she'd said the night before she vanished, and I couldn't contact you for a while. Would you wait for me? What do you mean, something happened? Just hypothetically. Nia, would you? Of course. But you're scaring me. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Don't be scared. I just need to know you trust me, even if things don't make sense right away. I trust you. Good. She kissed him good night, held on a little longer than usual. He should have known. He should have asked more questions. But he didn't. And the next morning, she was gone. No note, no call, no explanation, just silence. And 3 months later, a jewelry box with a hidden flash drive he didn't find until he was desperate enough to search through everything she'd left behind. I want to pause here for just a second, because this is the kind of moment that hits differently when you realize what's really happening beneath the surface. Drop a comment below. Have you ever trusted someone completely, even when you didn't have all the answers? Let me know what you're thinking so far. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. This story is only getting deeper, and you don't want to miss what happens next. They came on a Wednesday morning in February, unannounced, but not unexpected. Julian led the procession through the front entrance, like he owned it. Behind him came Aunt Colette in tailored black, pearls at her throat, Cousin Maurice with his lawyer's briefcase, and 2 men Bastien didn't recognize. Expensive suits, blank expressions, the kind of people who got paid to make problems disappear. The housekeeper knocked softly on the study door. Mr. Moreau, your family is here. They say it's urgent. Bastien closed the book he'd been pretending to read. Show them in. He positioned his wheelchair behind the desk. The symbolic geography mattered. This was still his house, his empire, his choices. Even if they'd come to take all 3, they arranged themselves with practiced precision. Julian took the chair directly across from Bastien. Colette stood by the window, hands folded. Maurice set his briefcase on the side table and clicked it open with the reverence of someone handling sacred texts. One of the suited men remained by the door. The other stood just behind Bastien's wheelchair, close enough to help, close enough to control. We're worried about you, Colette began, voice dripping with concern that didn't reach her eyes. Are you? It wasn't a question. You've been isolating yourself, Julian said, refusing medical consultations we've arranged. dismissing staff without consulting us. I dismissed one nurse who was stealing medication. Hardly a conspiracy. You're not yourself, Bastien. Maurice pulled documents from the briefcase, slid them across the desk with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this before. We've consulted with your medical team. Dr. Fournier believes your judgment may be compromised. Depression, isolation, possibly early cognitive decline. Bastien's hands tightened on the armrests. Fournier said that. He's concerned. We all are. Bastien didn't need to read the documents. He knew exactly what they were. Competency evaluations, mental health assessments, legal frameworks that would allow them to take control under the guise of protecting him from himself. Dr. Fournier, the neurologist Julien had insisted on bringing in 6 months ago, the one whose bills went directly to the estate management account. Bastien no longer controlled. Of course he'd signed whatever they put in front of him. This wasn't concern. This was a closing net, and they'd been weaving it for months. While Bastien was too focused on Nia to see the threads tightening. We understand you've been spending time with someone, Colette said, tone carefully neutral. Bastien's pulse kicked up. He kept his face blank. I spend time with many people. A young woman, a delivery driver. Silence stretched between them like wire. Her name is Nia Rowe, Maurice added, consulting notes he didn't need to consult. 26. No family in France. Works for a courier service. She's been visiting the estate regularly for several months. She was a friend. Was? Julien leaned forward. You haven't seen her recently. She moved. Took a job elsewhere. Where? I didn't ask. Colette's smile was sharp. How unlike you. The man who built an empire on details, suddenly incurious about someone he spent hours with every week. Bastien met her gaze, held it. People leave. I'm sure you understand the concept. We're not trying to upset you, Julien said, switching tactics. We're trying to protect you. This woman, Nia, we don't know anything about her, her background, her intentions. My intentions with her were my own business. Not when you're vulnerable. I'm paralyzed, Julien. Not incompetent. Maurice cleared his throat. No one is suggesting incompetence, but isolation can create susceptibility to influence, to people who might take advantage of your situation. You mean my. If you want to be blunt, yes. Bastien smiled. Cold, controlled. Then it's fortunate she's gone. One less thing for you to worry about. Colette's eyes narrowed. You really don't know where she is? No, and she didn't take anything when she left. Documents, valuables, there it was. The real question, beneath all the others. Nothing but a book I lent her. Bastien said smoothly, unless you're accusing her of stealing silverware, I think we can close that line of inquiry. We need you to sign these, Maurice said, pushing the documents closer. What are they? Medical power of attorney, updated estate management protocols, access permissions for your financial accounts and medical records. Access temporary. Just until your health stabilizes. Bastien looked at each of them in turn. His brother, who'd moved into the guest house and never left. His aunt, who'd shown up to his grandfather's funeral only to contest the will. His cousin, who'd failed the bar exam twice before finding work writing contracts for people who didn't read them. They didn't see a person in this chair. They saw an obstacle, a signature, a problem to be managed until he wasn't one anymore. And Nia, warm, real, unapproved, represented everything they couldn't control. She was a threat to their timeline, which meant she'd been in danger from the moment Bastien started to trust her. "No," Bastien said quietly. Julian blinked. "Sorry. I said no. I'm not signing anything today." "Bastien, this meeting is over." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "You're being unreasonable," Colette said. "I'm being clear. My health is fine, my judgment is sound, and my state is still mine to manage. If you have concerns, bring them through proper legal channels. Otherwise," he looked at the man standing behind his wheelchair, "get out of my house." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Julian stood, smiled that easy, charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. "We'll give you time to think. But Bastien, this conversation isn't over." "Yes," Bastien said, "it is." They left, slowly, with pointed looks and whispered comments, just loud enough for him to hear. The door clicked shut. Bastien was alone. He sat there for 20 minutes, didn't move, didn't call for anyone, just stared at the documents they'd left on his desk, like evidence of intent. They'd asked about Nia, which meant they knew she mattered, which meant they'd been watching longer than he realized. And if they were willing to forge medical evaluations and fabricate cognitive decline, what else were they willing to do to someone who stood in their way? Nia had disappeared without a trace 3 months ago. No forwarding address, no contact, no explanation. What if she hadn't left? What if she'd been removed? The thought settled in his chest like ice. Stay right here, because what happens next, it changes everything, and I mean everything. Make sure you've liked this video. It tells the algorithm this story deserves to be seen. We're about to reach the moment where all the pieces come together. Now let's keep going. It happened 4 days after the family meeting. Bastien was in the conservatory reviewing architectural journals he couldn't concentrate on when movement outside caught his eye. A woman he didn't recognize, young, professionally dressed, crossed the lawn holding the hand of a little girl in a yellow sweater. The child walked with that particular toddler gait, knees stiff, steps deliberate, like the ground might shift if she wasn't careful. Soft brown curls bounced with each step. She stopped every few feet to examine something invisible to adult eyes. A leaf, a stone, the pattern of shadows on the grass. The woman, clearly a nanny, smiled patiently and waited. But Bastien couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because he knew, before reason could catch up with instinct, before logic could offer alternative explanations, before his mind could protect him from the impossible truth standing 30 yards away, he knew. The little girl laughed at something. The sound traveled through the window glass, like a frequency designed specifically to shatter him. High and bright, pure, the kind of laugh that exists before the world teaches you to guard your joy. Wind chimes, that's what it sounded like. And suddenly Bastien was back in his study 8 months ago, December. Nia standing by the fireplace, with her hand resting on her stomach in a gesture so unconscious, she didn't realize she was doing it. "If something happened and I couldn't contact you for a while, would you wait for me?" The way she'd avoided his eyes when she said it. The question she'd almost asked a dozen times but always swallowed. The strained quality in her voice when she promised everything would be okay. "I just need to know you trust me, even if things don't make sense right away." She hadn't been saying goodbye. She'd been asking him to hold on. The images came fast. Nia turning away when he asked if she was feeling all right. Just tired, long week. The way she'd held him the last night they were together. fierce, desperate, like she was trying to memorize the shape of his arms. The flash drive he'd found 3 months after she disappeared. The hidden compartment in her jewelry box. The single file labeled, "When the time is right." He'd been too devastated to open it, too angry, too broken. What if it explained everything? What if she'd been protecting something, someone, the entire time? Bastien pressed the call button. His assistant Margot appeared within seconds, professional, efficient, unaware. She was about to deliver the truth that would destroy him and rebuild him in the same breath. "The child," Bastien said, voice rough, "on the lawn. Who is she?" Margot followed his gaze through the window. "That's your brother's child, sir. She arrived last week. Her name." Margot hesitated. Something in Bastien's tone made her careful. "Solana." The world tilted. Solana, sun, light breaking through darkness. It was a name Nia would choose. Bastien's hands gripped the wheelchair armrests so hard, his knuckles went white. "How old is she?" 3, I believe. Mr. Julian didn't provide many details. Said the mother was unable to care for her, that he's been managing the situation privately. The mother's name he didn't say. Of course, he didn't. Because if he'd said Nia Rowe, someone might have connected the dots, might have asked questions, might have wondered why Julian never mentioned that the woman his brother loved had given birth to a child 9 months after she disappeared. "Bring her here," Bastien said. "Sir?" "Bring Solana to me, now." 5 minutes later, the conservatory door opened. The nanny entered first, uncertain. Then Solana, holding her hand up close. The resemblance was undeniable. Nia's eyes, dark and bright and impossibly expressive. Nia's cheekbones. Nia's mouth, small and perfectly shaped. But the rest was Bastien. The shape of her face, the set of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when she was curious, like she was recalibrating the world to make sense of it. The room shifted around her small presence. Everything that mattered before, the estate, the money, the family circling, became background noise. There was only this, only her. Solana stared at him. Bastien stared back. Neither moved. The air itself seemed to pause, holding space for a moment that would define every moment after. She wasn't afraid of the wheelchair. Didn't look at it the way adults did, with pity or discomfort or the careful politeness of people who don't know where to put their eyes. She just looked at him, studying, measuring, deciding. Then she let go of the nanny's hand, took one step toward Bastien, then another. Each step felt like it crossed miles instead of feet. Bastien's heart hammered against his ribs. His throat closed. Every emotion he'd buried for 8 months surged to the surface at once. Grief, rage, hope, love so overwhelming it felt like drowning and breathing for the first time. She stopped directly in front of his wheelchair, looked up, reached into the pocket of her yellow sweater, and pulled out a small silver locket. She opened it with the focused concentration of a child performing an important task. Inside was a photo. Bastien leaned forward. It was him. A picture Nia must have taken during one of those long afternoons in the study. He was smiling, genuinely smiling, at something off camera. He looked alive, whole, happy. Solana pointed at the photo. "You're the man in the picture." Her voice was small, but certain. Bastien's vision blurred. "Yes," he whispered. "I am." The question came out before he could stop it, before he could protect himself from the answer. "Am I your dad?" Solana tilted her head, looked at him with those eyes. Nia's eyes? His eyes? Their eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "Mama said so." 4 words. That's all it took. 4 words to break Bastien Moreau completely. The tears came hot and unstoppable. He didn't try to hide them, didn't turn away or compose himself, or do any of the things men are taught to do when emotion threatens to unmake them. He just cried. For Nia, who'd carried this secret alone. For Solana, who'd lived 3 years without knowing him for himself. Who'd been given the greatest gift of his life by the only person who'd ever truly seen him. Solana watched him cry, without fear. Then she did something extraordinary. She reached up and touched his face, her small hand warm against his cheek. "It's okay," she said. "Mama cries too sometimes." The door burst open. Colette swept in, Julien behind her, both wearing expressions of controlled alarm. "Bastien, what are you doing?" Colette demanded. "You're upsetting the child." Bastien's head snapped up. The tears were still wet on his face, but his voice, when it came, was steel. "You brought my child into this house like she was leverage." Colette froze. What are you talking about?" "Don't." The single word, cut like a blade. "Don't insult me by pretending you didn't know." Julien stepped forward. "Bastien, you're confused. The stress." "I'm not confused. I'm her father." He looked at Julien, really looked at him, at the brother who'd shown up after the accident claiming devotion, who'd moved into the guest house and never left, who'd slowly taken control of every aspect of Bastien's life while wearing the mask of care. "You knew," Bastien said. "You knew Nia was pregnant when she disappeared. You knew where she went, and you kept my daughter from me for 3 years. That's not... Where is she?" Silence. "Where is Nia?" Julien's jaw tightened. "She made her choice." "What choice? What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth, that you were struggling, that the stress of a child would destroy you, that if she cared about you at all, she'd disappear and let you heal." The admission hung in the air, like poison. Bastien's voice dropped to something quiet and absolutely lethal. "Get out. Bastien, get out of my house, off my property, out of my life. You have 24 hours to remove your belongings. If you're here after that, I'll have you arrested for fraud, theft, and whatever else my lawyers can make stick." Colette's face flushed. "You can't." "I can, and I will. Richard Voss has copies of everything. Every forged signature, every manipulated account, every lie you've built this scheme on. Try me." For the first time since the accident, Bastien Moreau sounded like himself, powerful, unshakable, whole. They left, not gracefully, not quietly, but they left. The door closed. Bastien turned back to Solana. She was still standing there, watching, waiting. He extended his hand, palm up, offering, not demanding. "Would you like to stay with me for a while?" he asked, gently. Solana looked at his hand, then at his face, then back at his hand. She placed her small palm in his, her fingers curled around his thumb. And in that moment, that single perfect moment, Bastien understood something he'd forgotten in 4 years of isolation and pain. Love is not proven in speeches. It's proven in what you protect when it would be easier to look away. And he would protect this, her, them, whatever it took. Within 48 hours, Bastien had assembled a team. Not the lawyers Julien had recommended, not the financial advisors his family had positioned around him like guard dogs. Real professionals. People Richard Voss had vetted personally. People who answered to Bastien alone. The flash drive Nia had hidden went to a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud. The copies Bastien had made went to 3 separate attorneys with instructions that were crystal clear. Build a case that couldn't be dismissed, buried, or negotiated away. This wasn't about money. This was about justice, and more than that. It was about making sure Solana inherited something worth having. Not just wealth, but integrity. Not just an empire, but the truth. The files told the story Bastien had suspected, but couldn't prove alone. Forged signatures, authorizing transfers from estate accounts to offshore holdings. Medical reports altered to suggest cognitive decline that didn't exist. Communications between Julien and the business manager, detailing how to manage the transition when Bastien became incapacitated enough to require full guardianship. They'd been planning to have him declared incompetent, not someday, soon. And Nia, observant, detail-oriented Nia, had noticed the discrepancies before Bastien did, had quietly documented everything, had given him the evidence, knowing it might cost her everything. It had, but she'd done it anyway. Finding Nia became Bastien's second priority. The first was Solana, making sure she felt safe, loved, that the adults in her life weren't going to disappear the way her mother had. But at night, after Solana was asleep in the room next to his, painted yellow at her request, Bastien worked with private investigators to trace Nia's movements after she'd left. She'd gone to Belgium first, back to Brussels, where she'd grown up. Then the trail went cold for several months before reappearing in a small town outside Lyon. Medical records, obtained through channels Bastien didn't ask too many questions about, showed a hospital admission, complications during delivery, extended recovery. She'd been alone, carrying his child, protecting his future, alone. The thought made Bastien's chest tighten every time. But there was something else in the records, something recent, an address, current. She was alive. Here's what Bastien learned in the months that followed. The people who see your humanity when the world only sees your utility, those people are rare. Protect them. Fight for them, because love that costs something is the only kind that lasts. Nia had risked everything to give him the truth, had walked away from the man she loved to protect the child they'd created, had endured pregnancy, birth, and years of isolation, because Julien convinced her that staying would destroy Bastien. She'd believed the lie because it was wrapped in concern. But love, real love, doesn't abandon. It fights, even when fighting looks like leaving, even when protection requires distance. Nia had fought for him in the only way she knew how. Now it was Bastien's turn. One evening in early spring, Bastien sat in the conservatory with Solana curled in his lap. She was drawing something abstract involving purple elephants and orange clouds. Her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration. Every few minutes, she'd hold up the paper for his approval. Beautiful, he'd say, and mean it. Outside, the gardens were coming back to life. Buds on the rose bushes, green, pushing through the soil, the world remembering how to grow. For the first time since the accident, Bastien felt something other than survival. He felt hope. The future wasn't something to endure anymore. It was something to build with Solana, with Nia, if she'd have him, with the family they were meant to be. That night, Bastien recorded a message. He didn't know if Nia would ever hear it, didn't know if the investigators would find her, or if she'd want to be found, or if too much time and pain had passed for them to rebuild what they'd had. But he spoke anyway. Nia, I don't know where you are. I don't know what they told you or what you've been carrying alone. But I know this. You gave me the truth when everyone else gave me lies. You gave me our daughter when I didn't even know I needed saving. And if you're listening, if you're out there wondering whether it's safe to come home, it is. The people who hurt us are gone. Solana is here, and I'm waiting, however long it takes. I'm waiting. He sent it to the last known address, and he hoped. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love, someone you lost, or someone you need to fight for, please share it. Leave a comment telling me what hit you hardest, what moment stayed with you, what truth you're carrying away from Bastien and Nia's story. Subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Tyrell if you haven't already, because every single week we bring you stories that remind you what it means to be human. Stories about love that costs something, justice that requires courage, and people who choose integrity when it would be easier to look away. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I'm Mr. Tyrell, and I'll see you in the next one.